So we're going to go to the audience. You're one of our all-time favorite guests on the program. You're loved. Did you know you became something of a YouTube star? I think I was
No, I didn't know that.
I think I
I
was
don't need to hear that either, Josh.
don't tell your wife. Yeah, I think you got millions of views on various hits. And on the app Clubhouse, you've turned into a bit of a celebrity too. People sit around and listen to your talks. And I have some special friends who wanted to ask you some questions. So I'll first go to Joe Carlasari, who's an attorney in Chicago. Go ahead, Joe. Questions for Dr. Hunt.
Hi, Josh, and hi, Dr. Hunt. Thanks for joining us today.
How are you, Joe?
So,
nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you. So there's a narrative out in financial media that the Federal Reserve is all powerful. Some people seem to describe them as the Wizard of Oz to some effect. But, my personal view is no matter how many bank reserves you provide to the system, no matter how much QE or low rates at the front end you mandate, money creation is slowing. And we can see that things you point out, like the loan to deposit ratio. And also you see the structural issues you just talked about, things like demographics, aging population, unproductive debt, all those things you were just giving us a summary of, weighing against the trend. So really the question I'd like you to speak to, and it's something that's always on my mind, is, to what extent is the Fed and other central banks out there, are they pushing on a string? Aren't they at the point where we have negative real yields, where they're effectively impotent to stop this negative spiral that we're in? And the only real way to push against this demographics of destiny that you talk about is through fiscal authorities, because that's what I'm hearing. And I guess, aren't we focusing too much on the central banks at this point, given the structural issues that are in play? I'd like you to speak to that.
What a profound question. Very, very thoughtful. My congratulations to you, Joe. The way I would phrase it is that monetary policy has, over the normal range, has become asymmetric. When the Federal Reserve wishes to tighten monetary conditions, they can still have a negative impact. And we're going to see that this year. And the reason that they can tighten and have an effect is because the velocity of money is falling. It works for them. And also the money multiplier is falling. And so these two elements they don't control in the picture. But when the Federal Reserve goes to stimulate, it has to take even more heroic efforts. So last year, in 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, they coordinated with an unprecedented degree with fiscal policy. Total reserves of the banking system increased 90%, unheard of in 2020, and then another 34% last year. Since mid-December, they brought it down 10% because those rates were unsustainable. But what they didn't count on was that the size of the program was so huge, it interacted with the supply chain disruptions to boost the inflation rate. Now, the other difficulty here is that we have this growing debt, which you referred to, which I've referred to. Now, smarter people than me have addressed this question of what do we do about the debt? And the best study, and I recommend that you read it, is from McKinsey Global Institute. And you can go on their website, McKinsey Global Institute's the think tank of McKinsey, and you can buy this 2010 paper. And they looked at 24 advanced economies, no banana republics, that became extremely over-indebted in the time period from 1900 to 2008. And what McKinsey did is they looked at the buildup of debt They then tracked the deleterious effects of the debt, and then they charted the path out. And in the case of all 24 of these advanced economies for the time, the only path out was what McKinsey called a sustained period of austerity. And they defined austerity as a rise in the national saving rate. The national saving rate has three components: household saving, private saving, which is household and corporate, foreign saving, and government dissaving. And so here is the situation. We're not going to cure an indebtedness problem by taking on more debt. And so, but we're a modern democracy, and our people are hurting. They're not doing well. The growth rate's been coming down. They're worse off now than when the pandemic hit. Our household income from all sources, including transfer payments, interest income, and everything else in real per capita terms, is unchanged from where it was when the pandemic hit. So our people are not in a position to accept austerity. They wouldn't vote for it. So the risk is that we continue to try to solve this indebtedness problem by taking on more debt. In other words, McKinsey has pointed the way forward, but there's no practical political way in which we can take their advice. And that's where we are. Great question, Joe. My compliments to you.
Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up, Joe? Since your first question was so good.
Well, I guess the follow-up going to the last point you raised, Dr. Hunt, where you said because it's politically unviable to impose austerity. I'm sure that this is not the first time that has occurred. There's nothing new under the sun. So in those other countries where it was not politically viable to impose austerity, did the McKinsey study addressed whether there was how it comes to an end game? How do we reach the end game?
Well, you're a very smart fellow. You're a very smart fellow. Let me talk to you about those 24 cases. The most frequent way in which the problem was solved was either good fortune, something fortuitous happened, or it was imposed by the international community and a country was forced to change its ways. The one example that's in that 24 was the United States. We became heavily indebted in the 1920s, 1930s. It led us into the Great Depression. And although we managed to shave off some of the worst aspects of the Great Depression, when Germany moved into Poland in 1939, we still had 17 or 18% unemployed. Then World War II hit, and we were able to then start. We experienced a surge in our exports because the rest of the world was in the war. We were initially selling to everybody, and then when we joined the war, we were only selling to our allies, and they were war zones, so they bought from us. But there was another very unique aspect about World War II, and that is that we imposed austerity. We imposed rationing. So if you wanted, you would get a ration book that would allow you to buy a few gallons of gasoline, a few pounds of sugar, other critical things. You couldn't buy a car. You couldn't even buy 4 tires. You might be able to buy one. And so what happened as a result of this, World War II was a period of austerity. We did it because we were in a great crusade to save humankind. And so the government ran deficits of 14% of GDP, but private saving was 25% of GDP. And McKinsey said that this was really a fortuitous outcome. Another one that was not very fortuitous was Great Britain, or the British Empire at the end of World War II. Keep in mind, Britain had borne the heaviest cost for World War I, and in proportionate terms, the European cost, the British cost for World War II were much greater than ours. We were greater in absolute terms. And then at the end of World War II, Britain had difficulty rolling over its debt. So they had to start making decisions to cut back on spending. When one of them was that they cut back on military spending, and when they did that, they could no longer hold their empire. Remember the famous statement that Winston Churchill made about the British: the sun never, sets on the British Empire, but they disposed of the empire. When World War II ended, we immediately ended rationing in this country, but they had to continue rationing all the way to 1956. So generally speaking, the two main ways out historically was that you had something fortuitous happen, or it was imposed by the international community. Well, who today is going to tell someone else to get their debt house in order? We're all over indebted. Now there is a third type of fortuitous event that I think is worth mentioning, and maybe something like this could happen. Our first major debt surge was in the 1820s and 30s. We started building the canals, the early steamship lines, and so forth. But we overdid it. There was overinvestment, overconsumption, speculation, so forth. The panic year was 1838. Martin Van Buren was president. He had no idea what hit him. And the United States went through a very difficult decade of deflation, a lot of political turmoil. There were other things going on that weren't helpful to the situation. And we were really in pretty desperate shape. And then gold was discovered in California, Sutter's Mill. Not just a minor discovery of gold, major discovery of gold, which financed the Western expansion. And as a consequence of that event, the 1950s was the fastest peacetime decade of growth, the 1850s in the United States. So there may be something that comes, out of left field that could work, but generally speaking, the things that have allowed it to happen really were not done of their own will. And so that's where we are. Great follow-up question, Joe.
Thank you. I'll yield the floor, Josh, and I appreciate it, Dr. Hunt.